Okay, good. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, maybe there was no particular order, so we can talk about order, but did anybody add anything? No, no. Right. So I forgot if it's listed here. Well, we talked about use cases, but maybe also talk about, again, management term would be stakeholders, participants, I would prefer. Who should take an interest in this, maybe? Because at the moment it sounds like, well, okay, that's just lots of technical discussion among geeks and so forth, and they'll work it out, but I wouldn't buy that. I mean, they will produce something, but then maybe not what is of a broader interest. So maybe, I don't know if I should start. Maybe we should break out questions into individual items here. So participants. And by that I mean, yeah, data producers, data consumers. And right now, I mean, for many plugins, the developer of the compression method either develops a HDF plugin himself or herself. But in many instances, there's absolutely no connection. Somebody just found an interesting compression method and wrote sort of the H5Z. I think where we want to be clear is there is the HDF5 plugin, which in my mind is really just sort of the glue code that connects a particular compression method to the H5Z API or the H5Z extension API, so to speak. Or I don't know. We have to decide what we're going to call what. But for me, the plugin is really just the glue code. It doesn't include the source code or the code for the compression method, because there's a potential fault line. I think part of this exercise here is also to identify fault lines where we have to think about what can go wrong here and who takes responsibility for tracking certain things. Yeah.
Sorry, I stepped out. I just wanted to make a few remarks here.
Mm-hmm.
So users can write filter functions and use them from their own space, right? They do not need plugin, and it's valid. It's a valid filter function written according to rules. If they want to share their filter, they register it with the HDF group, and what they usually register, pointer to GitHub repository where that function exists. It's still not plugin. In plugin code, we have examples in our repo.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing wrong of having just functions that users can use in their applications, because they go through API, register the function, and then they call it as they will call it with the H5P set filter. So I don't know if in your community there is such use case. That it's not plugin, it's just function that uses some compression that can be reused by someone else. I think I need to give tutorial about HDF5.
No.
That's not.
How does an end user get access to the code to decompress?
So filter function is available, so it's in public, where when filter is registered, it will be probably useful to bring that site where we register the filters. Yep. And you will see, usually information is required about location of the code, who is maintainer, ID, and any other information, because it's just a big string that people can put all information about the filter. And they can share the function that can be used just as a subroutine, And there is HDF5 APIs. You use H5Z register to register by ID. And then in application, you use H5P set filter using that ID to use a filter function. So on the read, if it's optional, application just will say, I cannot read.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it can be, we have an example on our website. Yeah, it's under registered. Yeah. So if you go to click, for example, on, I believe Andy gave us filter. Let's look at what we have. Andy was JPEG, I think, right? No? No. Okay, let's look at Snappy, right?
yeah,
This is what Michael Risi. Oh, Lucas.
Lucas did it.
Huh. No, Snappy was.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have links that what the information was required when filter was registered with us. It's location of the code, and it's location of the whatever it is. If you go to Snappy, we can look at what Snappy function looks like.
Yeah, but this is the Snappy compression library.
It does matter. As an example, so we can look at H5Z function, and
Oh, you mean in Lucas's? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is sort of, well, that one is Snappy. This is.
it's two different implementations. One for CUDA, but it has the same filter ID. It doesn't matter when it runs, right? It's the same compression. You should be able to decompress it on CPU.
Mm-hmm. Right, but let's take a look at.
No, it should be C H5Z function.
But maybe his is really just the CUDA
Right,
version.
right. If you look at, so this is a valid thing to share, just code for the function itself, for filter function.
Yeah, I think this is a good example. You just can't find a filter.
Yeah.
And okay, it doesn't, probably it's not a problem here because it's calling Snappy straight away. And so the chunk most likely what's output of Snappy. But in some cases, it's a bit special the way it is packaged inside the chunk. It's not just the compression library.
Right. Oh, okay. Okay.
But for me, there's already a problem here. That's just a link, could disappear anytime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's one thing. And secondly, if I want to compile it and that, from what I'm seeing here, I'm going to have to dig into that code to make it work. Yeah?
Actually, there are the instructions, so when it was registered, that quality assurance should be done.
Yeah, but I think the fact that it should be curated, a copy at that time should be kept and maybe put into CI or something, just to know that at least what was registered still works. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the approach in Zblosk is to have a copy of the compression library inside the repo, and then you keep a copy there, and then you can update this copy from time to time.
So I just brought it as an exercise to see where we can start discussion, seeing deficiencies of approach that is now and a kind of, but there are different, among those filters, there will be different repos that will have a compression there, or they will describe where compression. For example, for filters that were in H5Pi, Andrew Collette had them in one directory, and I believe they even have all licenses, everything, and pointers to others. So, so there are different examples of how it's done.
No, but like like this, instead of being spread out, could be in one GitHub organization. And I guess you need to make it clear that it's not only the HDF group that's maintained that, but it's like community thing. But then you have a central place and you can impose some way to compile the thing. So it's sort of similar for all filters, and
I'm not arguing
that would
about
be
this.
much
I'm
simpler.
simply
And
showing you
like
example.
with the you have in the GitHub HDF group, we have the HDF5 plugin, which is already something.
Okay, let's separate. That's what I'm first thing. Let's separate filter functions from plugins, because plugins require much more work. Because the functions that showed here, it is just, I can find it. If I had my computer, I would find it for you. But
What's the difference between filter and plugin?
plugin will be loadable at runtime. This one you have to compile in. Snappy, this register function that you will need to compile with your application.
Yeah, but
You
if
will
I-
not be able to create a SO file. It is not set up for this.
Okay, but the difference is to have two functions that you expose from your SO that gives you the kind of plugin it is and the structure, giving you the pointer to the function. So it's
Some of those pointers that we have don't have it. They do not, they have make file to just have O file or whatever. It is static function can be, you know.
With HDF5 plugin, you've done that. You make a copy of the code.
yes.
Yeah, and then this is what you deliver. This is what you build and provide as a...
Yes, and also because we wanted to make it easy, like we hesitated initially, between doing like a Git subtree or submodules of all the different projects. But we wanted to provide like a source tarball that people can just take and build from source with everything.
That was not my point. I'm not arguing about this. So I'm just giving an example that already, you're right, there is internet field, as we saw with different repositories, where you can dig to find filter function and see if there are instructions how to build and how to use it, right? What we created after RDA, whatever it was with Ergin, it was repo of few plugins, really plugins that were curated by the HDF group. And those were chosen because they were in H5Py and PyTables. And since then, not much, and they're in CI, they are tested, they're distributed with the HDF5 releases. So I don't think people should be paying attention to, so registering filters should be separated from a question of creating plugin repositories and curating and governing it. Because people, we provide this capability to register the filter, just filter function. So it's separate.
Right, but I think what we're trying to decide here is kind of how we're going to manage all of this stuff, including that, right? But why? No, I mean, like, what does the ecosystem look like? I mean, I'm not going to be responsible for everything that someone registers. Right.
So you can easily conduct all those people. And first of all, is there demand for plugins for Snappy filter? Is there demand for plugin? So first of all, let's find out which plugins a community need. Forget about these filter functions. People can do in the GitHub whatever they want. They just want their ID be recognizable. If they share data with someone, people will know which filter was used. It's separate story from the plugin repository. So for plugins, no? Okay.
I'm sorry, I disagree. Because if you request the number to be registered, it's fairly unlikely. Well, if I get a data set, HDF5 data set, and I found out that it has the number 32,000, blah, 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 I say, oh, what's the shit? Then I'll find out, but it's fairly unlikely that I will rebuild the HDF5 library with the filter integrated so that I can load those data.
No, you do not need to integrate with HDF5.
If I would do what I need the plugin mechanism to be able to load dynamically this.
No, this is misconception. If you find HDF file that have some, you do h5dump-h, and you find this is ID, a filter ID that is used. I cannot print the data because h5dump doesn't have this function. You find ID, you find references to the website, you find filter functions, h5z. Then you take this function and you use it in your application using HDF5 APIs. That is why how it's different from plugins.
I think 90% of the people are using
I agree with you, but
Python
that's
code and they will not compile the application. This is why making it loadable at runtime is important. So Thomas and we see no difference between a filter and a plugin because we need a mechanism to load the filter into the memory, which becomes a plugin then.
Okay, it's valid point, but you are changing now the model that was used for 25 years, and users should be aware of this. So now registering filters should go through different process. And what will be required, you do not register, before you register the filter, whatever information you provide, it should have CI, it should have a SO file, it should have license, it should have everything.
Absolutely.
But someone has to curate. It's different from what was before.
Exactly. What we are here to do is define what CI, what license.
My question is, for users who do not want to have SO, and you're talking for this community, there are other people who registered with it. Do they agree with changing this registration mechanism and how the functions can be used?
This is all about creating, this is not about changing that list or having to email the help desk to get an ID. It's not about that. It's about creating a plugin repository that people like have a set of compression. I'm pretty loud talker, so maybe people can hear me fine. But I think what this is really just about curating a core set of plugins that people have agreed to maintain at some level and that are going to be useful for different communities, and anybody can join in if they want and create stuff in there, but it'll be checked and maintained kind of as a group and deployed potentially with the library.
It's not my point. You're absolutely right. It should be done. There should be the process how new filters are accepted and in which
But I don't think every new filter has to be that way. If somebody only wants to say like, hey, here's my filter function and I want an ID for it, they don't have to put it in that fancy repository. And in fact, that repository shouldn't have everything that's on there in it. It should really only be filters that are of high importance. And maybe we have a community section.
So we're in agreement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that can I use the chalkboard? People see it.
And I think in a way, the way the filter and numbering has been set up, all those above 32,000 are like user filters. They're not curated filters. Yeah. So now you could have a new number for ones that are curated. I mean, you got a range which is for ones that you say respect a certain set of requirements. No.
No, but not for registration. Registration, nothing changes about that. Curated, yes. If you want your stuff to go into, not the list that's on the HDF groups page, but if you want to put it into HDF5 plugin, like that's going to require you to hew to certain testing standards and code standards and build standards and whatnot. Like that's fine.
I don't think you need to change the numbering. It's too late. I mean, so you just keep it, but it's just having a list of curated filters that the ecosystem around this filter is big enough, or the code is robust enough that it kind of guarantees to be a long-term maintained.
I feel like I'm going to chalk talk this. Let's go over the board. Shock. This is great. It's like the 90s. So anyway, so we have so if we've got some big group of plugins, right? We're going to have some set that's curated. Sorry, I don't write very neatly, and then there's maybe some other set that's just it's like community, right? Where the bar to get into this is much lower, but this is just a convenience thing. So if you've got some group and we're not, maybe these are the things that are deployed with the library and where we check the CI and whenever we commit into HDF5, we check this, great. But then other people can stick stuff in here, and if they ever want to promote their stuff in here, great. We can talk about that. But this is a nice convenience location that goes along with our big list, right? That's probably going to be even longer than this, right? We've got list. Well, they're all registered. I mean, what it looks like is you have, so here's your big list, right? And then inside of here, you know, you've got, this is your plugins. And then there's some that are curated. And then there's some that are community.
No, yeah, but I think you want to keep the getting an ID easy because the worst is having some collision on the numbers that people just.
No, the numbers are all still, there's a master list right there. And we can keep this list in the plugins, right, repository so that everything is all together. And yeah, if you just want to put your number on the list, right, so that there's no clash, that's fine. We've got 65,000 numbers to choose from. We're not gonna have 65,000 filters anytime soon, so that's fine. Well, I get 32,000.
Oh, to me, you just want to advertise a subset that is curated, and that's it. Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, the stuff that's like for H5 Pi, if there's something that's like really critical to NASA or some future space program or something, like we put that in here, right? And then, but this implies that somebody is going to be monitoring this and making sure that, like, if the filter struct changes, all of these are guaranteed to be updated for whatever that new filter struct does. These, it's kind of the Wild West, right?
Okay, so now we have this repo, which we have already, right? HDF5 plugins. So it is curated, and what's wrong with this?
What's wrong with this?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think's wrong with it?
It is curated, it is updated, it is tested, it is released with every HDF5 release.
Yeah, sounds great. I think this is and then, you know, if this is the structure of what we have going forward, this is pretty easy to turn what we have now into this, include some more extra documentation. We'd want a template in here, I think, you know, maybe a tutorial like we did with the VOL connectors. And then we just have a working group that meets, you know, once every month or once every quarter or whatever to make sure to keep an eye on this and make sure that when we have releases, like everything's ready, stuff like that.
Elena, I think to answer your question, what we are missing is what are the quality requirements to go into the list of created, what is needed as a license, what are the acceptable license, or do we just require any kind of license? What kind of CI has to go through? I'm not sure all those questions have been addressed and are available in the README that we are seeing online.
I think some of them are implicit in what HDF5 plugin does now, but it should be more explicitly
It should not
documented.
be implicit, it should be clearly written with a checklist. Do I have this? Do I have a manifest? Do I have a copyright, and so on and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
No, there's a lot missing.
That's fine, yeah, but that should be right off the README, right? Yeah. And that's why I think that, like, you know, this has largely been maintained by a couple of people at the HDF group, and it needs to be kind of changed a bit so that it's more of a community maintainable thing with documentation that's here and not in Alan's head. Yeah.
If this becomes the official thing, I think the upstream plugin owners should be informed so that they can, like, propose a pull request there, because like 100%. Not like I'm looking like the bit shuffle, it's not the latest version in HDF5 plugin, ZFP the same, and so on. So either someone has to poll all the projects every month to see if there is a release, or you just ask the upstream to ping you or to ping the pull request on this, because it's.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier is, so like with BLOSK, right, they put the source code in the library, and do we want to do that for this? Right now we don't. Wait, no, actually we do, but I don't think it's like that's like necessarily official, obvious thing you have to do, but do we want to do that? Do we want to keep the source code for the compression libraries in here? Because if this is just like, oh, here's a GitHub link to where the code is, if that evaporates, then that's gone. And I don't necessarily want to fill the HDF5 organization with a mirror of everything. That's kind of a pain to keep up.
So first time when we started creating this repo, we had discussion, I don't remember now where we ended it, but none of the authors, including Blosk, really wanted to do any changes. They said, take our code, do whatever you need to create it pluggable and maintainable. So CMake files were added, so it will compile on Windows. Our tools files were added. So HDF group did a lot of work to make this, so CI can be used, it can be released and so on. So experience that unless someone wants to really do this work, this repo will stay as is now.
I definitely agree that we should view this as like anything that's inside here that we are probably going to have to do work to make sure that all of this stuff stays usable. Because yeah, like the idea that we're going to have changes that we push upstream and everybody's just going to accept them, I think that's not reasonable. That like, build files and stuff like that we have, I mean, we can try, and if people accept it, that's great. Or if we find security problems and stuff, but we may have to do patches and things in here in order to keep everything working for us. That's fine, right? I think that I don't anticipate that this number would stay very large. And then we have to think about things like governance. So like, what happens if somebody puts something in here and then a community decides that they don't care anymore? And there's a lot of data out there. Like, do we keep this creaking along, or do we demote stuff down into community? I don't know, right? Like maybe that's up to individual communities to decide. And at least then you have a record of what it was like the last time somebody updated it. And if suddenly some community cares again, then they can.
So once again, based on experience maintaining this thing for 10 years, even more probably with Alan, you do not, it is very rare, except Blosk, that something changes, or filter under development like ZFP. The rest of compressions, they never changed, and we had to maintain only build files. It's still a lot of work, right? But rely on people who produce the first filter function. So essentially for every plugin, there should be active assigned maintainer. That's what should be. And if no one maintains it, it's archived.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I still think you should archive it and not just kill it completely, because otherwise, user X who has a file that's been compressed with that filter, he won't be able to read it anymore, and he'll complain about HDF5, not about the filter inventor, or developer. Yeah.
On the other hand, I would not worry about this much, because HDF5 will keep a record what compression method was used, and writing compression function is really trivial exercise. No, for me it will not be trivial. I can tell you. Right, but they can. So it is not a disaster that data will not be accessible.
It's true unless the filter function is adding a header or doing some special things. And then you need not just the compression library, but also the filter function, how it was written. Like the bitshuffle LZ4 is adding its own header in the chunk. If you don't have the source code of the filter function, you can't read the data.
Well, then you have to have documentation for a filter function, and it cannot be accepted and registered until you have this documentation. So it's once again the process of registering. And if it exists, then it's less risky.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, for most of these things, they're going to be really easy. There's just not a lot of code in most of the filter functions. And if something changes in the library to where we have to update all the filter stuff, whether it's a build thing or whether it's we change the filter struct or whatever, then anybody who's not participating, then like, sorry, your stuff gets demoted. But for the other stuff that's up here, I think that since the changes are usually pretty simple, if we have a filter committee and people who are showing up, many hands makes light work. So yeah, it's a lot of work to maintain this stuff, but if there's like a dozen filters in here and we have like a dozen people on the committee, then everybody just picks one and updates it for the next time there's a meeting, right? It's not that much work.
I mean, it sounds good. What would be the added value for people doing the necessary work to get it in there? Would it be distributed as part of the library? Yeah. So I think this would be a motivation. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get it into there, you put the minimum amount of work to keep it going, and now you can get to.
He needs the microphone.
You're not using HDF5 plugins in H5Pi.
No, that's why Thomas' HDF5 plugin package exists to provide the HDF5 plugins.
And also there is Ed who has more functions.
Yeah, when I joined the HDF5 plugin package development, like it was already existing, and it was after discussing with you in 2019, I think, when I asked if you could put more compression filter in the core library, and the answer was no. So then I came to Thomas Clover and I asked, oh, could you ask some more compression plugin in H5Pi? And Thomas answered, well, if the HDF5 library is not doing it, we're not doing it either in H5Pi. So, well, then I end up did it. But yeah, I mean, and I completely agree with him. H5Pi is a Python wrapper on top of libhdf5. So if something is not in libhdf5, it's not H5Pi to add it, in my opinion.
With the library, do you no longer need that HDF5 plugin thing in Python?
So, sorry?
Do you no longer need that in that HDF5 plugin thing in Python if this is distributed with the library, the core one?
Yes, if the plugins are inside the library.
Distributed with the library, not inside, but distributed
compiled with or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, then it's not me to answer.
I think the challenge with that is that, like, if you, like, by distributed with, what I think you're talking about is kind of what you're already doing, that like with every HDF5 release, there is a corresponding HDF5 plugins release, and you put them on the website together.
No, they go into the same distribution thing. So if you install it as like a Debian package, you get that and you get the plugins. They all just go into the right locations.
I mean, if like most installation methods, you install HDF5 and you get both together. But my experience with Debian is that they will split it into two separate packages.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
You can install HDF5, you won't get the extra plugins.
The tools, I think, are even split.
So essentially, the request was to include those filter functions as part of pre-registered filters with HDF5 libraries. So they are inside. It's a module inside the library. And you guys told me at the time, no way. That's why, and as a compromise to that was, let's create plugin mechanism, and we spent time creating this plugin functionality in HDF5. So at least we can provide and build. But really what they need, and for example, MathWorks will need, is really to have those functions be pre-registered like deflate is pre-registered. It is not even that function is, but that filter function is inside the library per se, and it's compiled in.
It can be plugins still, but the problem is that when the filter links with libhdf5, then when you update the library, each time you do,
so it's built with HDF5. When you take the source, it's there, right? Because
no,
now it's different repo, it's different source. Yes. You have to build twice. Yeah. Instead of doing configure, build, install, and you have everything in installation directory.
Yeah, but I saw this is not what you wanted to do. like to put the
And
filter
what I'm
inside the
saying,
library.
ideally for you, that's what you guys wanted.
So I think the details of like precisely how it's built aren't so important, at least from my perspective. But what like kind of the sticking point for why we at Exfil aren't using more of the newer filters is just that like we can't guarantee even like, you know, even with a probability of like 90% or something, that people will have those available when they come to read the data. And, you know, that's complicated by HDF5 has this plugin mechanism, and there's a bunch of plugins that are pre-installed at the operating system level. But then if you've got like a Conda environment or something, and it's still looking at those same plugins, they might be linked against an older version of HDF5. So you might run into all sorts of issues with that. So it's kind of the having them reliably available and working with whatever version of HDF5 you happen to have loaded is the tricky bit.
But you see, you have this problem even with pre-registered filters like Zili, because if Zili library is not available in installations, and there are some light installations where it's not, that predefined function will not do you any good.
Yeah, zlib is kind of a special case because, like, I mean, you can't guarantee that it's there, but like to a first approximation, like it's reliably there. Like we can. It's the same problem in theory, but it's kind of quantitative thing. So like, it doesn't happen often enough that people come and complain like the deflate filter isn't working. Whereas if we used. Okay, I mean, we have the advantage of a nice, reliable Linux environment for all of our stuff, so maybe this helps.
Essentially, this brings bigger issue of external dependencies for HDF5 library. And as the maintainers of HDF5 library, we want to minimize external dependencies. That's why we want to minimize dependency on any compression libraries, etc. And that's why even decision to put like only two predefined filters, szip and gzip, need external libraries, right? And this already creates a problem because people to help desk, I cannot read my data, show me why, and oh, you don't have this library installed. So, but we kind of went off track. Let's go back to.
No, but I think Thomas raised a point with the, like when you use Conda and you reach the plugin installed on the system, there is a limitation of the filters. The filters don't just provide function that HDF5 call. And if it was the case that HDF5 called the filter and the filter just do its job without knowing anything about HDF5, then the filter, the plugins installed on the system could be used by any version of the library, no matter how it was compiled and where it comes from. And that's the limitation we have in Python, because we pip install h5py. What's the version of HDF5 in that? No clue, but we still need to run with this. Well, each time you make a release of libhdf5, you compile the filters against
this this thing that we talk about. Once again, is it?
It's a pending issue for years, so yeah, if you have a solution, please go ahead.
Right, so why we're linking with, and for some, yes, you have to.
But then if you want to change that, you have to change the plugin API, so that's, yeah, the filter API, sorry, yeah. Because it is now like BLOSC or BitShuffle filters, they need the data type and the data shape for ZFP to know how to compress the things. Like generic compressions like LZ4, I guess they don't need to call the HDF5 library. And some filters they also call H5 malloc, so they are bound to.
Yeah,
it will only be called malloc.
We don't recommend people do that anymore. That is true. We don't. Yeah, that should be changed. Yeah, and that should be one of the things that we tell people not to do when they bring stuff in. But in terms of like dynamically linking to, I have to think about how that would be done. I don't have experience with going the other way.
Also, we need to talk to people like MathWorks, because I know they build everything statically. And when they create MATLAB, for example. Right, and you cannot use, so I don't know how they use ResDeal. So whatever community you will,
Well, you can put a HDF5 plugin path environment variable, and then you can.
so, and I believe they're going through.
I think Armando did.
We need to talk to them. I believe they kind of duplicating things now. They really also doing a lot of unnecessary work. So if functions were in the library, it will simplify life for everyone, except the HDF group.
Well, I don't want the dependencies, right? I don't want to have to build and then have to find like a whole bunch of different compression libraries. Like that sucks. I do not want that problem. Yeah, but we should have this, right? People can like build with that, build the HDF5 plugins and then pick which ones they want to build, not make it my problem, which is the library.
No, we don't ask that either. We just ask it to make it to be easier to have the filters. And that one filter compiled one time can work with different HDF5 library. You don't have to have linking problem, and then it's simple.
One detail point, the way you build the gzip plugin currently, it is by default statically linked. So basically you link statically inside the plugin so that when it loads, it cannot be any, I did not find the library.
Well, it's not, I wouldn't say it's statically linked. It's created as a part of the executable. I mean, it's statically linked into the same thing, whether that's a shared object or whether that's a static library. If there's no, when you go to find the zlib stuff, it never goes down the plugin path because it will always find it.
We could imagine that you enforce, we are here to define what is needed. We could enforce that the code for the plugin should statically link the bzip library or any other external library that should be compiled statically within the plugin so that you don't have external dependencies within this plugin.
But still to build it, I have a dependency, right? So if I go to build,
To build it, yes, but the user, when he gets the plugin, he does a DL open on it, it loads.
But I believe those plugins are built this way, because Alan builds them, they linked, when you load it, it has a compression library within, you do not need to install it on your system. For this curated, Yes, because we're bringing all those libraries, exactly.
Well, consider Kunda environment, that consider Docker file, well, all those things are duplicating all those libraries times 10, 100 times. So, well, if you're duplicating one system library, it's probably not that much of an issue.
Well, anyway, I guess Debian packager will remove all this.
They will do the things the other way around for sure, and they will use the one shipped by the library. But that's how Debian works. I'm not here to blame Debian.
You know, I think it will be very good if community where it starts or committee, whatever will be created, look what is done now and see how it should be done differently. Because as Dennis said, by using a lot of memory, because there is cache for those plugins, and there are not only plugins of filter plugins, there are wall plugins, the VFDs plugins, and all this will be in the same, sitting in the same cache.
We don't have to solve every single one of these problems today. I think today what's really important is to get the organization of this started, and then we have routine monthly meetings, and then we start to hammer out what some of this work will look like, because we already have a starting point. We can use the HDF5 plugins. It's a thing we already distributed, and we can modify that as we go along to do the things that we want it to do. Yeah.
We could give say there'll be a path forward how you could add new curated filters. I think the community, then it's their job to do the work to get to that level, but at least it opens a door then, yeah.
Right.
And it makes it maybe more, I think it addresses this problem of reading files in 10 years' time, or even more reading files at all, yeah. People will have more confidence in HDF5 because they know it'll be, they just, it'll
I
work.
feel like a good place to start is just H5Pi, right? Like we have a really good use case for making sure that like everything works together well. It's a highly used thing. People will yell at us if we get it wrong. And so it's used on Windows, it's used on Mac, it's used on Linux, it's used in many places. And it's a good place to try all these things out and make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and there's already quite a lot of filters in the HDF group HDF5 plugin repo, so no, no.
Do you have some that are not
+2.
So I think there should be, we identify several steps. First, create committee, technical committee. The first step of this technical committee should be to review what exists, document, and provide some recommendations of the next steps. And next steps can include definitely gathering use cases like from MATLAB, from Thomas, from other communities, and see, because right now there are too many unknowns except what we know that it's not quite working for everyone. But it should be something that people can see what is wrong with it and what we want to achieve. It's essentially, I would start with documenting the problems, because we're talking now, you know your problems, maybe I don't understand them completely, I don't understand what Thomas, I know people were screaming at us all the time.
There's places in the GitHub repos to do this. We can use the wiki in the thing in the GitHub repo to document like meeting notes and to-do lists and problems that we want to solve and things like that. And we can create discussion pages where people want to argue back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just, oh, really? Weird.
Yeah, I can read it here.
But I think it's already.
It says the support pages.
I think we're sharing the
for HDF
screen,
library specs
perhaps.
seem to be very poorly indexed.
Yeah,
on
we're
Google.
screen sharing,
Struggle with them frequently.
so we can stop that.
Trying to find the information needed. Yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. That Google does not index the HDF5 documentation yet. It's better than it used to be, but it's still not great. We need to do some SEO.
Index the old Confluence. Yeah, the old Confluence. And it will never, and because we are getting away from old Confluence.
Yeah. Oxygen.
No, oxygen. Okay, I can talk and go.
Yelling to both of them.
Right now, there is a problem. So right now, if you want to go look at reference documentation, look at new web pages, and portal hdfgroup.org has link to those new pages for documentation reference manual. This is in Doxygen, so it is really up to date and released every time. But Portal had also a lot of other documentation that was not ported because it doesn't belong to headers, right? It doesn't belong to, and there is valuable information there, for example, FAQs, releases information, when you go, what changes from release to release, some
I would say
performance.
that just hasn't been migrated yet, right? That's a we had to move to Doxygen because we wanted to have all
I
the
know, but
documentation
people
with the
now
code.
have to look at two places, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I'm saying. And I usually, if you go, Gert, let's show, I know we shouldn't supposed to show it, but let's try support hdfgroup.org. Oh, that is not working anymore?
No, we were there earlier.
Support.
Right, but that's Brian's point that that's not indexed by Google.
No, support.hdfgroup.org was indexed.
No, never.
Oh, because it's now shut down, the server is shut down.
No,
No?
it's there, but it's not being indexed.
Okay, it's the old page. If you go to HDF5, I just want to show you something. Documentation. No, let's go to documentation. Documentation. For example, I always go to unsupported prior release 1610. Go to 145 user guide. It's in the middle of the page. Higher, 145. Up here, and you will find wonderful, very short documentation, say on filter, on caching, on data set chunking. For example, look at filters. It's very valuable where everything is described, and even there is a example of filter function that you can read. Here it is. And there is some other documentation that they really very nice, small, good pages. Environment variables and configuration parameters. Some of this was migrated, but some was not. So I found it personally very useful. I use it all the time.
Yeah, well, this is the third migration, because you went from this to the support portal, which made it very difficult to dig through the API functions, I thought. I always preferred the older version like this, and that was what I always used, unless it was something that was a new function that I would go dig around in the headers. And now it's in the Doxygen. The Doxygen is very nice because the Doxygen is always kept up to date, because as the developers change the code, you can change the Doxygen. And also too, it's very easy to scan through the header files and see what does not have Doxygen comments. So you can ensure that everything, at least in the headers, is documented. And so we've worked on making that migration. And it's still not perfect. I mean, the layout and the indexing of the Doxygen is terrible, and so we need to fix that sort of stuff. But a lot of the auxiliary documentation, all these RFCs, these white papers and stuff that we've created, that those are not linked out of the Doxygen documents or anything like that. Some of them are in HDF5 docs, some of them on the website. So that's something that we need to improve.
Yeah, but really very nice. This link for RFCs, this is very good.
Yeah.
Said this, there are also other repos where very important documents are stored.
Yeah. But this is an ongoing process of pulling things together. I mean, we're a small company. We don't have, I can't take like a half dozen people and just say do documentation for a year. We would run out of money, and then we'd have to turn the lights off, and then nobody could say documentation. So if anybody knows of large sums of money to give us, then let me know, and I can definitely assign people to do documentation for.
I heard you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe start talking about who wants to be on which committee.
I think there's only needs to be one committee. We don't have too many committees. Yeah. Yeah, just the filter committee. Yeah.
Plugin, yeah.
Yeah, but at least even for filters, I mean, there is a question of, okay, technical details ad infinitum, that's fine. But then somebody has to decide, for example, when it comes to retiring plugins or accepting new things, or what is the code of conduct, if you wish, or the template, what are the expectations setting. There are some technical considerations there, but there are also considerations that have.
But this is what this committee should work on.
I mean, I don't think that work is going to be so onerous that we would have to have two separate committees that met separately. I think that, you know, we can take some of, like, if we have a monthly meeting, we could take, if these things come up, then we have a monthly meeting where we talk about retiring plugins. And then we have these HDF user groups where the interested parties will be together and where we talk. So, and if there was really a pressing need to have more meetings, we could always do that. If something really came up that was critical, then we could have a special meeting. But yeah, keep it simple. I just want once a month, interested people, many of whom are in this room, we get together and we we chat and we try to figure out what to do.
But I think, I mean, all of us have busy schedules. I'm not saying anything new here. So, and I think there is a lot of stuff to talk about. For example, also on the science side, again, this is a very sort of a very active part of the community, but the community is much, much bigger. So we are a fringe group here. There are many more HDF users out there who we haven't heard about or who don't talk much. In terms of usage of compression methods, there is probably a silent majority out there. They might just be passive and say, well, we'll use whatever the library gives or something like that. But then maybe, who knows? I mean, there's so many compression and data reduction development going on out there that we are not aware of. And so again, for me, there need to be science drivers, scientists or scientists with some sort of technology interest need to drive this from the scientific side and say, so somebody, for example, should tell us, well, I mean, how many new compression methods have been mentioned on this meeting? Not all of them will turn into plugins at some point. Some of them might. So what is the rate of growth? Or will compression just become obsolete? Or what's the pressure on revising the H5Z interface? And there are just tons of things. And I'm not saying that's all imminent and we have to start talking about that tomorrow. I think it's important to make progress. And
Gerd, that's a very valid point. But you have to start somewhere. And if you start with a small committee that just outlines the issues and invite other in community, HDF community, to bring their issues, at least you will start gathering those and invite people. Right. So you just start small and then you will grow. And for example, people who has to be invited from the beginning, I believe it's Charlie Zanders and Ed Hartner, because they are very active in compression. And there are, some things that needs to be.
To me, I will not bother about the future yet. I mean, we are here, like we've been discussing for quite some time already on the existing situation. So, and we have some ideas on how to structure things more than it is now. So I will just start with that and what you have in HDF5 plugin on the HDF group GitHub organization. And then that will structure for the future.
Maybe I have an answer to you. How many registered filters do you have? And for how long have you had this plugin mechanism available? This gives you two figures. You divide one by the other, and you will get an expected growth rate, which is likely to be around 2 per year. So we are spending all that time for 2 plugins per year. So.
Yeah, I think that that's a starting point, but I think also the dynamic has changed. I mean, there are 2 separate issues. One is the ability to have dynamic plugins was in 1.8.3 maybe, or 1.8.11, I don't remember 1.8. But of course, you could compile the library with other plugins since whatever, 1.4 or since the very beginning even. Yeah. And then of course, compression maybe 10, 15 years ago was not as important as it is today. So there are all kinds of other factors. But the web page that I showed earlier that lists all the plugins, I forgot how many, several dozen. Yeah.
I think improving the situation will contribute to having more filters being standardized. And seen as we're running into large data volume issues, I think I see a possibility that it goes a bit further than what we have today. Today, you wouldn't put in maybe what we heard of all those methods because you don't even know how long it's going to be available. What is a chance that you can still read that data? Yeah.
But when we went to GitHub, everybody came out of the woodwork, and I expect this could be the same sort of thing, that you're just going to get a lot of participation because people have a venue and a place to put things, and so we may get a lot more participation. But in terms of outreach and reaching out to other communities, I think that's something that's kind of orthogonal to this working group that we're setting up here, that just the fact that we have this thing and that we're actively working on it and that there's a committee that is when we go to meetings, we mention it to people, eventually the word will get around. And it's really our job, like in the HDF group, to evangelize this and to tell people about it and stuff. And I think that's fine.
Even if it doesn't grow, it'll stabilize what's there.
It makes everything that's happening now, like this is just the way that it works. We can put this into CI and make sure that everything works well together. I mean, that's one of the things that we've been trying to do just with our own CI that you can now see on GitHub, to make sure that we work with H5Py, that we work with NetCDF. We're just trying to make sure that the whole HDF5 ecosystem works well together and has some sort of CI, so that as we update the library and change things, we make sure that everything stays functional.
Yeah, it's not necessarily good to have too many options, because then people don't know what to use. I mean, then you have to start benchmarking everything. And
I think that keeping the number of like canonical plugins small makes that job a little easier. And I think also too, requiring people to have some documentation that says kind of what is this for, right? Is this something that's very used in, say, genomics? Like that gives people some clues. Or is this a general purpose compressor? You know, that sort of thing. In terms of which one should I use, if there was some sort of a script that you could run that would just run various compression mechanisms over your data, right? Like if you had some Python thing that like just you could run it, it would try a whole bunch of different plugins and then tell you what the compression ratios were. That'd be a very handy thing to have. People, I think Mark Miller brought this up at Ohio.
It was brought many times, and one of the requirements that we were trying to enforce, and it never happened, that when you submit the filter function even, you submit example data that is compressed. So first you can test it, you can, and that never happened, and it should be done. Another thing that this committee should be looking at, there are a lot of work going on in exactly the field comparing compressions. And one of the things was what one of our power users wanted. For example, there is an array of data that is stored in HDF5. How much overhead HDF5 creates when compression goes through HDF5 library, or you just use a tool like gzip or compression on that array. So if this information available, and if users can publish this information, which GitHub allows you to do, it will be very helpful in this. And this work is going in the community. It should be, once again, people invited, here's how you do it, let's share, and let's improve when we see how it works. That's it. But for example, Argonne Lab, they have the tool that will print very nice PDF report for you when you put something, it runs the tool and compresses and prints you with different parameters, etc.
I'm pretty sure I'll be on that committee.
You can count me. I cannot be technical, but I can contribute.
Yeah, but part of this is also organizational, right?
Right.
That's important as well.
But I'd suggest, I would suggest Peter Steinbach, who was talking, because he's also coming from a different community, the laser community. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Francesc. And what about you? Or
Yeah, Thomas. Yeah, we should ask Ed, June.
And well, it'd be good to have other communities. So maybe, I don't know, someone from XFEL. It doesn't have to be you, but someone who's interested in compression in XFEL. or the felt, or even from LCLS or someone, yeah. But I think we already got it. Huh? Yeah, Dectris, yeah, the commercial people, yeah. Yeah, no, they are, and they are interested. Yeah.
I can ask, or then I can ask Ellen from MATLAB, right? MathWorks.
Even if they're not on for a very long time, it'd be nice to hear from them to make sure that what they're doing. Even if they were not, if they didn't have to participate for a long time, it would be nice to know that what we're doing is something that really helps them out, because I'm sure many other pieces of software like them are going to try and do the same sorts of things, have the same problems. So it'd be nice to know that we're doing the right thing.
Well, there's also kind of education part, because you can use current H5 repack to play with the compression and see how well it's compressed. So the users do have tools already to experiment with compression, because even with the private compression, because it takes just ID number, and if it's pluggable or built in, you'll be able to do it.
This is like a great topic for a talk at the next tutorial at the next HDF users group.
I even have code somewhere, because we did it. Albert had.
See, now if we did it, it would be on YouTube. People can watch it forever.
I have my reservations about it.
At some point, sort of, yeah, blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, practical work has to take place, but this would be the kind of thing to go maybe to foundation like Chan Zuckerberg or Sloan, or, I mean, I don't know in Europe how big foundations are.
Yeah, I think that would be a very useful thing to talk about at some of the committee meetings, like where can we get funding for this sort of work?
Yeah.
We're looking for, well, we're going to have open calls next year for funding, so people will be able to get small amounts of funding for over the next 4 years, yeah, from the EOSC, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And also maybe, I don't know if all of this can run through GitHub, or if we need other sort of shared infrastructure.
I don't think so, yeah.
Is sufficient for this?
Yeah, I think we could do this all with GitHub.
I'm not sure it's like huge amount of work, right? Like
Well,
it's a bit of work of organization at the beginning, setting up things and or structuring how it works, but then on a day-to-day basis, once the CI is set up, the repo is set up, we agree on things, then it should run like probably some extra discussion when new filters comes in, but apart from that, it should be usual software maintenance.
Yeah, I think that it's not a lot of work to kind of get some of these initial things going. But if we did want to make bigger changes in terms of CI, in terms of,
yeah, sure,
like, I mean, if we really wanted to have somebody sit down and like try to solve all the problems that we have right now, like if I were scheduling that, I would schedule, you know, some fraction, some non-trivial fraction of an FTE, then that would be their job for like, and that's not zero money, right? I mean, yeah, you can spread that out among a lot of people and over a long time, and it becomes kind of hidden, but it potentially is some amount of labor. And if you wanted to do something like, it doesn't have to be like a lot of money, but if you had enough money to do stuff like, you know, pay for somebody to put together a tutorial repository and put on a tutorial, I mean, that's several weeks of work.
Yeah,
that's like 2 weeks of work for somebody, right? So
sort of what about exotic, in double quotes, hardware, but also shouldn't this be, I mean, you want to build this from spec, for example. So I don't know, this is maybe, I mean, it's sort of in the E4S planetary system, it's not the sort of close to the center, but still, I mean, for HPC systems, I mean, people use compression. I mean, that's why we have parallel compression. And but right now, this is probably not being tested. It's not even in spec, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, but that may be.
But yeah, all of that is like some low-level background work, right? That like you have to do stuff. I mean, nothing's zero work.
Yeah.
Spec that people can use to build DAOs until, and I believe it's still not there. Maybe now it's accepted into.
I don't know if it's actually officially.
Yeah, but there is a way in spec to kind
I
of.
think it is officially in there.
Maybe it's now, they accepted it, but yeah, but it's exactly the same problem, how many dependencies you will have.
Yeah, it's a bunch because you got to put all the compression libraries and.
Yeah, either Amazon or Chen Zuckerberg or Sloan, or all of them have something this fall, and we could. Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean NSF pose? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're building for ecosystem.
Yeah, although they are, for the, I think this would then be that they have these two phases. This would be a phase one where you basically spend a year planning. And you cannot spend that money for engineering work and things like that. You would have.
Yeah, I don't want to wait for that. I want to solve these problems now.
Yeah. Although. Right. But I think I wouldn't say, well, we have to defer all the engineering work and do all the planning first. It's not that. Some of these things can happen at the same time. Planning is important, but I think, as Thomas pointed out, there are things we can do right now, and we know we don't really have to wait for a bigger plan. And anyway, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Go through any of them.
I don't have that talk here because I gave that talk in Ohio, so I have to go dig that up. I can do that and like maybe email it. Oh, it is on. Is that on the website? Yeah, we can go. Where are the hug talks from Ohio?
Slides will be there. Go to agenda.
Yeah. What is it the last day? No, it wasn't the last day. It was like the second day. Community discussion. Whoop, past it. There we go. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, I did tell
Oh yeah, so in here, I can just kind of scan through them really quick so people can kind of like freshen themselves here. So let's see here. So we're thinking about journaling and crash integrity, Unicode, especially on Windows, threading support, streaming, sparse data, better support for variable length data, cloud storage, useful error reporting. See, I told you it was on my list. And let's see here, and smaller stuff, yeah, which are tiny things like performance improvements, expanding data types, things like float 16 and Boolean. Improved security, which we're working on. Code structure, automation, more transparency. And then Quincy identified a bunch of other stuff too, and I did not. There were a couple other things that came up when I can't remember. They were off the top of my head. Yes, streaming is definitely something that we are very interested in. So for the people here, what are the pain points? What are the things that drive you bananas about the HDF5 library that you want us to fix and work on in the next year? Yeah, what you got? Yeah, exactly. People should be complaining. How do I know what to work on?
So I already mentioned this in the forum, and it's kind of a specific little detail, but it would be nice with the various iteration APIs like walk and visit and things like this, if there was like an iterator style API for it. So something that you could call, next and get the data back, rather than the callback style API where you give it a function to receive the data. Just for the, something
like H5I begin iterate, and then like H5I next, and then H5I prev, and then you could just walk through it.
Mm-hmm.
You mean the callback functions? You can't make those multi-threaded? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a nice thing for H5Py as well. Then we could expose these things as Python iterators as well.
I see. Mm-hmm. Here, I'll make some notes on the blackboard, and that way I guess it's gonna be recorded too, but let's see here. So yeah. Still visible? Sort of. It's like I'm teaching in grad school again. What else? Come on, you guys gotta hate something.
I just want to repeat what I heard from the plugin people here. When thinking about compiling or linking both ways for plugins, it seems interesting to me to see if an API can be defined where enough data is provided so that a plugin doesn't have to call back to find more information about data types and so on. And I don't know if it's realistic that you can provide everything that might be needed, but if there is a small set of extra data that many plugins need, maybe it could be discussed if it should be added somehow. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. Or dynamically linked to the library, right? That just search for the function by name.
Yeah, I think you understood the point. I'm not really programming much in C, so I don't want to go into the details, but I think that's the idea, that it should be provided.
I've never tried to implement that, so I don't know how terrible that is. Yeah. But how would that work though? So if you're going to pass in like a data type, like, I mean, you need the library to tease that apart and figure stuff out about it, right? If you pass in a data space and I mean, you have to pass in some sort of encoding of it.
No, but you can look at existing filters, what they use. I mean, that would be a first start to know what kind of information filter are accessing. Anyway, if you change the plugin like filter structure and things, I think one of the limiting factor also is that at least when you read, the filter is allocating the memory.
Memory
And
callbacks,
then
yeah.
this memory gets copied over and over. And just the ideal case for me is that I'm on H5Py, I allocate my NumPy array, and then I say, give me this selection of data into this array. And then the memory of this array goes down to the filter, and the filter just uncompresses in place already. And then it goes back all the stack, and there is no memory copy.
Yeah, we have a filter memory overhaul. There's, if I remember correctly, there were some changes that we were thinking about making to the filter struct back with the direct VFD changes because of memory alignment issues and things like that, that had to be preserved as you went up and down the stack. And so that was only like partially finished.
Remember, in the filter functions, we do not know the size of, when we decompress the size of the buffer,
Right.
and we start doubling it. And this is why John was proposing to have to store the size of uncompressed buffer in the file format, so in the file. Then filter can take advantage of this. This will be part of
But
metadata.
is that guaranteed though? That like, I mean, if you have some filters, so if underneath the hood, right, you've got like some filter thing and it links to, some zlib that was compiled with certain parameters, and now, it's 20 years later and it's compiled with some others.
No, uncompressed data. Uncompressed
sorry,
data.
sorry.
And this will help with at least some of memory reallocation that filters do. And then, yes, Thomas is correct. So if they pass the buffer, like they have an API, this also should be probably considered. So it is in user's buffer.
Yeah, that would handle a lot of not every case, but it would handle a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Like for when you do data type conversion, that you have a background buffer, you can do that already, similar to that.
You heard from John Wright, yeah. We still have this problem of simultaneous accessing files that are open for writing. But it's an old problem, and Swimmer does solve some of this, but I think we just have to work around that. I know we have some workarounds. Yeah.
For reading, that should be fine. And we have some file locks, but they're shared file locks, so you should be able to access.
Oh, yeah?
Because remember, at some point for reading, for when you are not in Swimmer mode, second process couldn't open the file.
You can't open the file if you're going to try to read, if it's open for any kind of writing. So by default, so if you try to open things up, right, it's going to open it up, read, write. And if you try to open up a second one, it won't work because the library is going to recognize that you are trying to open up a file that is already open. It's going to recognize that you might accidentally do multiple writer, and it'll tell you no. But if you open it read-only, you can have as many read-only things as you want, and it should just work.
Our problem is that they worried about corruption, yeah.
Yeah, because it's opened with like a shared lock. So as soon as you try to use.
So
Does it work like with the writer writing through GPFS from one node and the other reading through NFS from another node? And this is how we do things. And I think NFS is not supported operating like file system because it's not POSIX. So
I think that the way that NFS is implemented in like V4 or whatever the current version is, it does work okay because our library tests that test for that pass on NFS. The swimmer ones will eventually like fail, but at least it gets to the point where, I mean, it does understand that like that you're doubly opening up a file. You can probably trick NFS if you do it in different ways, if you have like different paths to it and stuff like that. But I think that under the hood, it does in practice figure it out if it's NFS. But yeah, you can definitely, you can trick it for sure.
I was just going to add, I've investigated it on GPFS, and the file locking thing that HDF5 uses doesn't take effect between nodes. Like I can.
Yeah. On parallel file systems, yeah, locking. In fact, it's usually turned off on like Lustre, I think. And so.
So there's two like Unix file locking things. The other one works across nodes, but the one that HDF5 uses.
Yeah, by default, I think the way that it was implemented is we try to use flock, right? But you can also use fcontrol, and that's the other way of doing it. And we didn't use that one. That was a little kind of, doesn't map as nicely to what HDF5 is trying to do, because that one allows you to do range locks and all that other stuff. And flock is just really simple. It just like locks the whole file. But yeah, that's always, it's one of those things where I kind of wish that we didn't have that and that people would just learn to not open the same file twice for writing, because it generates so many complaints because it's one of those things that was never standardized, right? So like file locking across file systems and across operating systems is just a mess. And so it's hard to support everything. Oh, let me chat here. Yeah, and I'm all ears if people want to make improvements to that. I'm not married to the existing implementation of it.
Right, and I would say let's call it a day because you and I have a meeting.
Oh yeah.
And we can have more discussion tomorrow. So anything that comes to mind, bring it back tomorrow or add it to the document.
Cool. Thanks for coming.
Cool.
thanks.